I'm just reading them.
Many would run live. Many here. Okay. We're live. Okay. We are broadcasting live. We are live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube and on Zoom. I'm going to share it on a couple of other Facebook pages. And we are good to go. We're going to begin today in our Life Chumash, page 815 is where we're going to start today. We'll give it a moment to have people join, and we will get rolling. Okay, we are covered. We are now broadcasting on all our platforms. God bless the internet. Don't know what they did before it. Maybe they didn't broadcast classes before it. We are in Parshas Bamidbar. We're in a new Chumash. We are in a new book of the 5 books of Moses. Believe it or not, we finished Genesis, we finished Exodus, we finished Leviticus, and this week we begin the book of Numbers. But in Hebrew, it's called Bamidbar, which means in the desert. So we're going to go through, we're going to traverse through the time that the Jewish people spent in the Sinai desert, just to give, for a change, to give the secularists a little bit of room. The translation of the book, why it's called Numbers, is because in many places in the Talmud and the Medrash, it's referred to as Chumash HaPekudim, the book of counting, the book of numbers. So it's not so off. Of all the things they've mistranslated, this is not high on the list. They've done a pretty bad job on a lot of other things, but this is not one of them. So it talks a lot about numbers because it's called Numbers, right? Look at that. And I'd like to dedicate tonight's class. I got a call just before class about someone, a dear friend of a member of our community who needs a blessing for good health. His Hebrew name is Yehoshua ben Miriam. So Yehoshua ben Miriam should have a speedy recovery, and his surgery should go well, and he should have only good news going forward. And our Torah study should be a merit for him. There you go. You learned well. So we talk about the various tribes and the various encampments and the various numbers of each tribe and where they camped around the tabernacle, around the Mishkan. And then it talks a lot about the tribe of Levi, the tribe of the Levites. Now, the Levites are divided into 2 groups. You have the Levites we call Levites. That's how they're not only from the tribe of Levi, but they're actually referred to as Levites. And they do a host of work in the tabernacle. They do the music, the instruments, the singing. They do some of the carrying. Actually, they do, I think, all the carrying of the primary vessels. There was wagons that carried some of the beams, but like the primary vessels, the menorah, the table, etc., they did a lot of that. They did all of that. So they had a lot of jobs. But then there was a second half of the tribe of Levi, which are the Kohanim, the priests, and they have their own set of jobs. Serve, there's a high priest, there's a whole program. Now, in the Torah, in this week's Torah portion, we count the Levites from the age of 20 to 50. There's a special count for how many Levites existed that lived from the age of 20 to 50. What's 20 to 50? Here we go. 20 to 50 is the age that you got to serve the primary service of the tabernacle in the Mishkan. It was 20 to 50. But in addition to that, there's also a counting that we read about, and it begins on 8:15 at the bottom of the page. So this is the 6th reading of tomorrow's of Shabbos' Parsha. God said to Moses, count every firstborn male of the children of Israel aged 1 month and upward, and include their names in the sentence. But take the Levites for me, I am God, in place of all firstborn among the children of Israel. The Levites, animals in place of all the firstborn animals, of the children of Israel. So we read about that we're counting. So follow this. We have to count how many Israelite firstborns there are. Male firstborns. Why? So I'm going to give you a crash course, a 120-second crash course. initially, before the Exodus from Egypt, God intended for those to serve him in his eventual tabernacle, those to be the primary servers of God, were meant to be the firstborn, the b'chor. A firstborn son was meant to be in service. Then came the Exodus from Egypt, and God killed the firstborn Egyptians. He saved the firstborn Jewish boys, right? They didn't die in the plague of the 10th plague of the death of the firstborn males. And therefore they were kept in this high status of being in service of God. And they were going to be those that will serve in the tabernacle, eventually the temple, etc. Then came the sin of the golden calf, the Chet HaEgel, and the firstborns were part of the sin of the golden calf. The Levites were not, and God made a swap. He said, those that will serve me going forward will be the Levites, not the firstborn. Now, there has to be an equal firstborn for every Levite, because it's interesting how the firstborn don't get to serve anymore, but they haven't lost their status. Till today, a b'chor, a firstborn, has a lot of status in Judaism. They get double the inheritance. And I told you I have an older brother, and it's very uncomfortable for me to face that reality. But they get double the inheritance. Whatever the rest of the siblings get halachically, a firstborn son gets double. They get, it says you should honor your father and mother in the 10 Commandments. And Rashi says right away, quoting from the Talmud, L'Rabbois, why does it say, Kabet es avicha ve'es imecha? You shall love your father and your mother. Why doesn't it just say love your father and mother? Why and your mother? Why the your? Why the es? And right away, the Talmud tells us that you're obligated. It gives us the addition that we're obligated not just to honor our fathers and mothers, but to honor our older brothers. We're obligated biblically to honor our older brothers. And by the way, I take this mitzvah very seriously. My brother drives me insane. You guys, those of you that know Yechanan, but he is the guy that God told me to respect. He's the older brother. And we joke about it all the time, about the double inheritance. We'll wait and see at the right time, but it's a fact. It's a Jewish fact. But God said, you still keep your status as a firstborn, but you don't get to serve in my tabernacle. That's going over to the Levi. So each baby Levi that's born is counted from what age? From 1 month and older. And the Torah tells us from 1 month and older. And each one is a substitute for a firstborn that could have been serving, that maybe even should have been serving, but because of their sin, they don't get to serve anymore. So there's a Levi for each b'chor. What's the problem? When you looked at the census back in the days of Moshe, there was 273 more firstborn than there was Levites. So those 273 firstborn needed to be represented in the service, but there was no Levites to step in for them in service. So that's where the original concept of a pidyon haben, where you redeem, except it's the other way around here. I mean, it's not really the other way around. It's done slightly different, but each one of those firstborn, the family, the parents, the father had to redeem and give money to the Kohen and to the Levites as a substitute for their son who should have been in service but can't be in service, and there's no substitute for it. And there's all this entire episode of how the substitute goes down between the firstborn and the Levites goes down in this parsha, this pidyon haben, the substitute of the son. But here's where it gets interesting. When it talks, you have a question?
Yeah, but no, I have a million, but that's okay. Keep going.
Okay, you'll learn
I'm
it.
going to think about it.
Okay.
Make a list.
So it gets interesting because Rashi, when it talks about counting a Levite firstborn, Rashi says as follows. Why do we count the Levite firstborns from when they turn 30 days? What's 30 days? What kind of random number is 30 days? Oh, so what does that mean, viability? You're right. You learned this somewhere, or you just popped it out of your head? Maybe you learned it and you forgot.
30 days of birth.
You know that from the Torah. In secular rules, you don't hear that. You for sure learned it somewhere in the Talmud. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. From this room. Yeah. This room emanated this idea before, but Rashi in our Parsha quotes and says that when a baby is 30 days old, the baby is now out of the realm of risk. And we're going to get into that a little bit more detailed soon. But at 30 days, up until 30 days, the viability of a baby is in question. Now, of course, things happen to babies after 30 days too. But up until 30 days, there is by default a risk involved with the viability of the baby. Once the baby turns 30, and you're not in the risk anymore of the baby losing its life, Says Rashi, they now are counted to be the protectors of the honor guard of the Mishkan. So a 30-day, a 1-month-old baby is now considered the honor guard of the tabernacle of the Mishkan. I'm still quoting from Rashi because it's fascinating. Pay close attention. Rashi continues and says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shalom. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Reb Shalom, said, we learn that that this tribe of Levi is worthy of being counted from when they're in their mother's womb. How do we know that? Because of the book of Exodus and Shmos, when the Jews were going down to Egypt, it says, Asher Yolda Oisel Levi Mitzrayim, right? There was Yocheved. Moses' mother was born just as the Jews, Jacob and his family, crossed the threshold into Egypt when they were going down to be with Joseph, right? She gave birth as they were coming through. No, she was born. Yocheved was born. Moses' mother was born as they were crossing the threshold into Egypt. And nevertheless, she is counted as one of the 70, when it says, B'shivim nefesh yardu, Mitzrayim, that with 70 souls they went into Egypt. Moses' mother is counted in the list, even though when was she born? After they crossed into Egypt. And it says when they were going down to Egypt, they were already counting her as one of the 70, which means she was counted in her mother's womb. Therefore, inherently, a baby, even in its mother's womb, is counted, is considered a baby, even though technically you have 30 days after birth until you know for certain that this baby is viable, but already in the mother's womb at the time of birth, it's already considered a baby that is worthy of being counted. So, I mean, obviously this has ramifications in halacha and Jewish law as it relates to issues like abortion. That's not where my class is going, but it's absolutely very much connected. So I'll just state for the fact that those that don't know, that in halacha, if a mother's life is physically in danger, if the mother will die, not if she'll be uncomfortable, if mother will die, her life always comes first because she's a living being. But short of the mother dying, the idea of a baby in the mother's womb being questionable is not a Jewish concept. Now, obviously, there's a lot of nuance here, and it's not the topic of today's class, but that statement I just made is an unquestionable statement. It's a clear statement, therefore I'm comfortable saying it. And anyone that wants to debate it or argue or converse with me about that, I'm happy to do that anytime. But it's very interesting when you look at Rashi, this Rashi about the viability of the baby being counted already in the mother's womb, even though you wait 30 days. First of all, because Rashi uses a language like wasn't really necessary. It says, you want to say that the baby's counted? Tell me the baby's counted after 30 days. But Rashi goes and says, Likare Shaimer Mishmeres HaKodesh, that the baby is old enough now at 30 days to be counted and called a member of the guarding honor guard. Why does Rashi need to tell us that? And more importantly, you count them from when they're in their mother's womb, but then they're part of the honor guard. What does it even mean to be an honor guard at 30 days old? I mean, for all the governments you've ever seen, all the palaces you've ever seen, when are babies an honor guard? And yet here, Rashi's emphasizing that Hashem counts them from a very, very young age, even quoting the Medrash about Yocheved, meaning even in the mother's womb, and they're considered specifically members of the honor guard. In other words, there's the tribe of Levi, as I mentioned earlier, was counted and hired in service for a lot of different roles. Right? You're not going to have a 30-day-old baby playing music or doing instruments. They're not going to be schlepping, they don't even do that until they're 20 years old. So then what are you counting it for? And that was part of what was bothering Rashi. Rashi's trying to figure out, what are you counting them for? In Judaism, for those of you that were at the JLI class on Tuesday, we know there's a concept of ayin hara, there's a concept of the evil eye. We try very hard not to count numbers. It's actually considered a prohibition in Judaism just to count. That's why we count by shekel, or if you're counting for a minyan, you go Ishia es amecha avarek es nachlasecha. There's a verse in Psalms that has 10 words, and you count it by words, not by numbers. Numbers is a tricky thing. And over here, not only are we counting the Levites from ages 20 to 50, we're counting them in addition we're counting them from birth. For what purpose? And Rashi was bothered by that. Well, we'll talk about honor guard in secular palaces just means people that stand outside for honor, honoring the royal family that lives in that palace. You asking me about a secular palace? I don't know about Judaism. I'm going to talk about it in a second. So one of the jobs of the Levites, one of the jobs of the Leviim was exactly that. Mishmeres HaKodesh, the honor guard. What does that mean? They lived, there was the tabernacle. Around the tabernacle, the four sides were different members of the Levi and Kohen family. And their job, in addition to just being there out of honor and respect, simply that, their job was also to ensure that no commoners, which in Judaism means no Israelites, no non-Levites, should cross over into territory that they don't belong in. There's the Machane Yisrael, the encampment of the Israelites. Then there's Machane Levi, the encampment of the Levites, and then there's the Mishkan where the Kohanim go. The Levites' job was to be an honor guard, but also to protect the perimeter, to make sure that no Israelites cross the territory that doesn't belong to them. Therefore, Rashi comes here with this novel idea that even a 1-month-old baby, being with their mother, right? A 1-month-old baby is nursing and they're with their mother and they don't really have their own independent existence. Nevertheless, they are old enough and viable enough to be considered part of the honor guard that will just help be a buffer, right? There's another body there that can buffer from the Israelites, the commoners, from crossing the border into a territory in which they don't belong. So you say to yourself, well, that really doesn't make sense. They're not there because they're own independent honor guard. They're there because they never have to be with their mother. Their mother can't go without them. They can't go without their mother. They're 1 month old. They can't survive without mama. So if they can't survive without mama, are you really going to give them credit for somehow being there as an honor guard? That was the second thing that was bothering Rashi. The first thing that was bothering Rashi was, what is a baby being counted for an honor guard altogether? Now you say, oh, they're being counted because they're part of the honor guard to protect the perimeter. Question number 2, how could you count someone that's not really an independent entity? For that, Rashi says, this quote about Yocheved being counted from its mother's womb. Because if you only count the baby from after it's born, right? If a viable baby if a worthy baby is only after it exits its mother's body, then Yocheved would have never been able to be counted when they were going down to Egypt. Because when they were actually traveling down to Egypt, until they crossed the border into Egypt, she still wasn't born. And therefore, there would be no way to count her as one of the 70 because she wasn't born on the way down. She wasn't there. Except she is counted. How could she be counted? The only way she could be counted, and that's why Rashi quotes that sage, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shalom, to teach that, is that she was counted because she was counted already in her mother's womb. And what's unique about that? In her mother's womb, she's not an independent entity. A baby is not an independent entity in its mother's womb. It's an entity. It's a life, but it's not an independent life. You only become an independent life when you exit the mother's womb. And yet, the Torah counts her as one of the 70. And if that's the case, then even a Levite baby who's 30 days old, who really is not really independent, they live with their mother, they're attached to their mother, and they don't really get to choose, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be there, I'm just with my mom. Nevertheless, we can still count them as part of the honor guard because they are a Levite child, right? They were born a Levite, and they're a Levite child that has the honor of being in the Levite encampment and has a worthiness, even at that young age, to be part of something incredible. And this really leads to a much bigger discussion. I mean, obviously, I normally say this in the beginning, and somehow I didn't, but everything I'm sharing with you is from different thoughts from the Rebbe on the Parsha. I didn't sit there today and say, what can I come up with myself? What's interesting is that sometimes people poo-poo. They're just a baby. What do they know? What are they going to remember? What do they see? What do they hear? Now today, even scientifically and psychologically and medically, it's proven that babies in utero are affected immensely, not only by God forbid the drugs that their mother may take in utero, not only the alcohol they may consume, but the foods they eat, the environment they're in, the things the baby hears in utero. I mean, this is already scientific. Right? Otherwise, why do you prohibit a pregnant mother from taking fentanyl? Why would you stop her? Let her have fentanyl. Zygis not with your fentanyl. Because it's going to affect the baby. But that's an extreme case. But even things you hear and see. So we know scientifically that even in a mother's womb, but how much more so once the baby's born, right? Let's say from 30 days and up, every item, everything that the child sees and hears has an incredible impact on who they are and could have good or negative, positive or negative effects on them later. You know, it's very interesting. In the fall of 1983, the Rebbe was bringing. And he was talking about one thing. What he was talking about was the photographers that were taking pictures of it in the whole time in shul, and it made him crazy. He couldn't stand it. And somehow he couldn't understand how the photographer has so much time. Like, why aren't you learning? Why aren't you davening? When he's standing with a camera snapping pictures of someone else davening, don't you have to daven too? So, but one thing led to the next, and he started talking about, he says, here, I want to talk about something else. It's explained in many Jewish Sfarim and holy books that anything a person sees, good or bad, has an incredible effect on them. So if a baby's born, you don't want the child, for example, seeing as a baby, even as a baby, seeing their parents being intimate. You don't want babies. The Rebbe spoke at that Fabrengen about children seeing non-kosher animals. We try very hard as Jews to buy for our children. In Montana, it's a little hard because the kids end up with teddy bears and whatever from Yellowstone, grizzlies. But, you know, buy your kid, if you're buying them a doll, an animal, buy them a moose, a kosher animal, buy them a bison, buy them a lamb, a sheep, a goat, a kosher animal, a chicken. Don't buy them something that's treif, that isn't holy, that's an unholy animal. That's what they're going to see, and that's what's going to be their vision the whole time. And you're going to have them listen to things. Let them listen to holy things, to good things. It has an incredible effect. They used to talk about how the Yiddish mothers used to put their kids to sleep singing Rozhikes with Mandlin and Afen Pripitchik and all these beautiful Yiddish songs. You never heard Afen Pripitchik? Afen Pripitchik brennt a Feier und in Stubis heiß und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder lach dem Aleph Beis. You never heard it? Sag je noch amol, take noch amol, kometz Aleph oh. Beautiful, beautiful old Yiddish melodies. That's what you send your kids to sleep. When your kids are singing Lady Gaga to sleep, what do you want them to look like? They'll grow up being one walking upside down Lady Gaga. She was hanging on the stage upside down, probably. They'll be upside down because that's what you pumped into their head. A child is not dumb. A child is not immune. From a very young age, from birth and even prior to birth, everything we do for them and with them has an effect on them. You know, there's a famous Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha Kohen Gadol, the great high priest. He was a high priest. His name was Rabbi Shmuel ben Kohen Gadol. I'm sorry, Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha was a high priest. His mother and his father Elisha were infertile for a long time, and then they asked Hashem for a special blessing to have a baby, and she went to the mikveh. And it's a credible medrash. She went to the mikveh, or maybe it's the Zohar, I don't remember where I saw it. She went to the mikveh. She came out of the mikveh, and the halacha says, in the code of Jewish law, it says that when a woman goes out of the mikveh, she should make sure that the first thing she meets should not be something unholy or impure. So a dog or a donkey or a horse, something that's unkosher. And if and the halacha says in the code of Jewish law, if they do, they should go back to the mikveh. Go over and purify yourself again before you go home to your husband. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, the high priest, his mother went to the mikveh. She came out of the mikveh, and it says she saw a dog. So she went back to the mikveh. She came back again. She saw a camel. She went back to the mikveh. 80 times she went to the mikveh until she could go home. And then her and her husband conceived, and they had a baby who ended up being the high priest, Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha Kohen Gadol, the most incredible Kohen Gadol. The point of the story, you can analyze for the rest of your life about going to the mikveh 80 times in one night. I can tell you that most women would check out way earlier than 80 times. But the point is, there's something to be said about not only what a baby sees in utero after birth, but what even their mothers saw the night of the conception. It has an effect. There is a spiritual, energetic connection with what goes on and how careful we need to be in the purity of that child from day one. Everything can affect. And that's why there's always that image of when you're teaching a kid the Aleph base, you teach him an Aleph, and the way I grew up and the way it's been probably 150 years is you have a guy in the middle holding on his shoulder a pole with two buckets of water, like a water carrier, right? So the Aleph is a guy with the water, right? And so the image is a guy next to the water. And the Rebbe says, make sure that when you see the water, sometimes the image has fish in the water, no problem, kosher fish, but then it always has a kitten sitting by the water, by the banks of the water. The Rebbe says, get rid of the kitten. And then the Rebbe spoke of that same Farbrengen. You'll love this. The Rebbe spoke about the Achbar Hayadua, the famous mouse. What's the famous mouse? Mickey Mouse. The Rebbe said, you pump kids a whole day with the mice. It's a treif animal. What are you showing kids? Insects and creepy, crawly animals. That's what they have to see. The point is, and that's really the whole point, is choosing wisely. Choosing wisely and choosing carefully. Well, it's not just about kids, but even kids, choosing what we see and the effect that things that happen in a child's vicinity and their environment has on them. And it becomes even more as we, next week, God willing, I expect to have class next Wednesday night. It's the night before Shavuos, so I still expect to have class. But we are coming up in 9 days is Shavuos. And we're going to receive the Torah. And it's interesting that the Rebbe was a big fan. You can stand. You can lean on me. It's okay. It's all good. The Rebbe was a big fan of bringing babies, even babies, not only babies, but even babies, to bring them to hear the Ten Commandments on Shavuos. And the Rebbe was the only one that made this campaign. Every young Jewish boy and girl from birth and on should be in shul to hear the Ten Commandments. And what do you need a baby in shul for? So they should scream, they should cry. What do you need them there for? Because their neshama needs to experience it, their soul needs to experience it, because it has an incredible effect, an indelible effect. When a child is there, their neshama, right? A soul is spiritual, so age doesn't matter. Cognitive ability doesn't matter. It's speaking to your neshama. If it's speaking to your neshama, let the soul be inspired. I'll never forget in 1991 when my sister Mushki was born. She was a big crank, and she was a cranky kid. And we were all older, right? I was already 10 years old, almost 10. Rachel, the youngest at the time, was maybe 5 or 6. And suddenly there's a new baby in the house. So my father would take her to put her to sleep, right? It's his little baby girl. And he'd put her on his shoulder, and we went bananas because he did this like 3 years straight. The same song, right? Not Sesame Street, not Mr. Rogers, not Dr. McStuffin and the Paw Patrol and Barney and the Kolaminim and Chalazedim. He used to put him to sleep singing this again. Shuva, Shuva, Hashem Admosei v'inochem alav odecha. It's a beautiful melody that was composed for the Rebbe's birthday when the Rebbe turned 90, I believe. And it was that time, right? That's when Mushki was born. Maybe when he turned 89. I don't remember what age, but somewhere around there. And he'd sing that to Mushki. And we, the older siblings, we all laughed because in our sleep, we were like, oh God, he's doing it again, the same song. But when you look back, you're like, what a beautiful way to rock a baby to sleep. Why do I have to not rock them with a song that some country singer made up while they were getting divorced for the 9th time? Why can't I sing a song with them that a chassid who's learning chassidus and davening 3 times a day and inspiring his soul and working on his refinement? That's a song that a child should go to sleep with. But Shavuos, we bring a baby to shul, even a baby to hear the Ten Commandments, because that speaks to the neshama, that speaks to the soul. And it's interesting that when it came to Shavuos specifically, and I'll wrap up with that because it's an incredible medrash. So the Jews come to Sinai. They're coming to, right, 50 days, they counted up from the Exodus from Egypt. Now they get to Sinai, they're going to get this greatest gift that God ever gave humanity, which is the Ten Commandments, which is really all inclusive of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And God says to the Jewish people, says the Medrash, it's both printed in Medrash Tanchuma and a Medrash Rabbah, in different versions, but the episode is quoted in 2 different Medrashim. God says to the Jewish people, who are your guarantors? I'm going to give you this incredible gift. Who is guaranteeing for me that you guys are going to be worthy and keep your job and following this Torah? So the Jewish people, without skipping a beat, said, our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember those guys, the ones that were so devoted to you? They're the guarantors. God says, unacceptable. I had issues with all three of them. The Medrash goes, Abraham had this challenge, and Isaac, for example, loved Esau, but I hated Esau. God says, what are you loving this? God didn't like Esau's behavior, but Isaac, his father, loved him. And Jacob had this issue. So no, I don't want them as guarantors. They need their own guarantors. Then the Jewish people said that the Jewish prophets will be our guarantor. God said, Yet. They went through a whole list, the elders. Then they said, Banenu arevim ba'adenu. Our children will be our guarantors. The next generation of Jews will be the guarantors. And God said, accepted. Now, I will tell you, there's a downside to that, which people won't want to hear. I didn't like reading it today either, which is sometimes we wonder why children suffer in this world. And we don't have an answer to that, nor am I going to try to answer, but the Medrash says over there that because the children were the guarantors for the Torah, well, you're a guarantor for the Jewish people's behavior. When the Jewish people don't behave, sometimes the guarantors have to pay the price. But obviously, on the most positive side, the Rebbe said, and the Rebbe emphasized this Medrash 1,000 times, children are the guarantor. And so when we think we can poo-poo a child in their spirituality and their holiness and not realize this is it. If you start it young, the sky's the limit. Sometimes I hear parents say silly things. Actually, I hear parents say silly things all the time, but specifically about this stuff. My kid will turn 18, I'll ask him if he wants a circumcision. What are you, crazy? When my kid's older, I'll ask him if he wants to be Jewish like his mom or Christian like his dad. His mom's Jewish, which means he's Jewish, which means there's no choice involved. Don't give them a choice when there is no choice. All these silly things are just ways of parents passing the buck of their job. And what is their job? From the day of conception and even prior to it, as we saw with Rishmol ben Elisha, to ensure that whatever this child, from the day they become a concept, from conception until the day they pass, spirituality, holiness, and the energetics of goodness should be, and positivity should be what they encounter, what they should be hearing, what they should be seeing, purity. And it's no crime. It's no crime. People will say, oh, you're keeping your kids in a bubble. You're keeping your kids in a ghetto. No, was ist schlecht? What's wrong with that? I need to take my kid into which world would you like me to dump my kid into? Is it Hollywood, Nashville, Dish TV, pornography? Which success of secularism does my child need to have in order to be a well-rounded human being? They don't need any of that. You can have a well-rounded worldly child because they sit with their dad and they learn history and they learn about the Constitution and they learn about the revolution, Manny's favorite thing, and they learn geography without getting corrupted and distorted and impurified, which is a word I think I just made up, but it's a good one, by what's out there. Our job is that the minute God gifts us a baby in our arms, and even prior to that, to follow the lead of the Levites. They can too be part of the honor guard if the mother who's at their side holds them with them as part of the honor guard, imbues them with what it means and what it means to be inspired as a member of the Levite honor guard, and lives their life not invested in Mickey Mouse, but invested in Almighty God and everything that represents. And so as we prep ourselves for Shavuos, which we will, the Jewish people started prepping themselves. In addition to the counting of the Omer, they spent 3 full days away from their wives, going to the mikveh, prepping themselves. It's called Shloshis Yimei HaGabbalah, the 3 days prior to Shavuos, before they receive the Torah. So this year Shavuos is on Thursday night, which means the Shloshis Yimei HaGabbalah, the 3 days are Thursday, Wednesday, and Tuesday. So starting Monday night, this coming Monday night, we begin the 3-day full-on prep time for Shavuos. And if we truly want to receive the Torah, as the Chassidim always said, with joy and inwardness, with joy and internalization, it starts with a proper prep. So may we prep ourselves with purity. So wherever you may be next week, even if you may be on a fishing boat, no names, not mentioning any names, wherever you may be, you should prep yourself for Shavuos, and whoever you're with, you should explain to them what we just spoke about, the importance of purity of children. And any time you meet a segment of society that's trying to mess with children, by the way, this rabbi, I'm going to speak in third person, right? It seems to be a thing these days. This rabbi generally doesn't get involved in the typical heated conversations that go on in society, political or otherwise. But if you want to see him get riled up any time of the day, try doing something that involves how you're going to mess with children and children's perception of the world, children's perception of God, of the way of life, of the Torah way of life. Then you'll see Chaim Brook in all his glory, lit in fire, ready to blow something up. And so let us keep our children holy. Let us keep our children pure. And there's nothing wrong. Don't let them shame you away from that. We could do it even in 2023. It's a little harder, maybe a lot harder, but it's doable. And we should all be on that team because the purity of a child is what makes them worthy of being the guarantor for the Torah and allows us to welcome in and usher in another welcoming of the Torah. For the 3,336th time, we're going to receive the Torah with joy and internalization. Good night, sayonara, which I is Japanese, not right, and we'll see you back here soon. Sei gesund.